The next person we're going to take up, as you know, is Luther, and we're in this little sandwich area, which is sometimes called the Renaissance. There's not a lot of great philosophers. I mean, there certainly are philosophers that are connected with the Renaissance, but not huge, important kind of characters that would occupy us. But there is a lot of things that happen philosophically, and so the way I'd like to tackle this is somewhat unusually. If Jacob? Oh, sorry. I'll take a run. At some point along the way, it's always interesting to see what's happening philosophically through the eyes of art. In this case, we could do the same thing with music. There's other ways to approach this, but art is sort of helpful. And so we're going to start fairly early and actually come clear up to the 20th century. And I'd just like you to think about what's happening artistically and how that reflects the things that were happening philosophically. And so we're starting here with a little miniature that goes back to the 6th century. This would be the 500s. And it's a little piece of art called the Rabula Gospel. And it represents what's called Byzantine art. Byzantine is connected with what? What is the background of the word Byzantine? You know, where does that word come from? Blank stares around the room, even in the dark. I can see the blank stares. Avery, Byzantine.
It sounds like Byzantine.
Thank you, excellent. And so what does that suggest to us? Avery, go ahead.
That suggests that this piece of art came from such a place in the 6th century.
All right. Well, it didn't, but you're right. Byzantium is the name of a city, and my question is more to the point, what's the significance of the city of Byzantium? Go ahead, Megan.
Byzantium was where the new Roman Empire was established.
That's right. And actually, the name of the city had changed from Byzantium to what? It was called what? Go ahead, Megan. Constantinople. But the term Byzantine continued. And it's not so much that it came geographically from Byzantium or Constantinople, but it came, in a sense, philosophically from there. It's Byzantine art, meaning it reflects the influence of a Byzantium outlook. Now, let me ask you this. What do you think of that art? Sydney, you look at that art, what kinds of things come to mind? Yes, an art critic here. What do you think of that piece of art?
Well, it doesn't look very realistic.
It doesn't look very realistic. That's an excellent observation. In what sense do you say it doesn't look very... What is not realistic about it?
The people especially.
The people...
Are kind of flat.
They're flat.
Kind of flat.
Exactly. The people are flat. That's a good place to start. What else? Matthew, what else impresses you as you look at this? Is this something you might run out with your digital camera and just snap this shot somewhere on vacation? What's also unusual about this picture?
Well, the colors aren't super realistic.
Okay, the colors.
To real life.
Okay, they don't reflect real life. What else? Anything else?
That's kind of...
What else? We got, go ahead, Jacob.
Well, it says it on the bottom, but it looks a lot symbolic because you see looks like Jesus in some kind of window over there, and then there's angels and everything, and it doesn't look like that's intending to depict an actual physical event, but more like some kind of idea.
Okay, very good. So you see that there's some kind of earthly, apparently, characters, and we have this separate level. Apparently that's Jesus. We got angel dudes there, looks like. They got wings. Philosophically, what's going on? I mean, aside from what the picture itself is supposed to portray, what philosophy do you think is at work that would generate art that looks like that? What philosophical outlook would produce art that looks like that? Megan?
I think it could be that art should be representing church or theological things.
Okay, it's religious, certainly. So we'll grant that it's religious. What else philosophically is going on? That's fine, that's a good point. What else, just philosophically, is this art communicating? Go ahead, Sarah.
Is it sort of Platonistic in that there's the ideal and the earthly, because heavenly and earthly separated?
All right, y'all see that? It's exactly what's going on. This is Platonic art. This reflects the influence of Augustine. Y'all see this? You know, you've got two levels. You've got an upstairs and a downstairs. You've got things holy, transcendent, sort of otherworldly. Then you've got characters down here. None of these people, however, look real. There's nothing realistic about it. These are not supposed to be real people. The entire piece of art is supposed to say to us that the most important things are not real. The most important things are more heavenly rather than earthly, right? This is not something you take a picture of with your digital camera. Because what you take pictures of with your digital camera don't matter. You see, what matters is some different level of reality. And we can only symbolize them. And so the statement is that it's more abstract and symbolic rather than realistic. And that's really characteristic of, throughout the Middle Ages, you've got that kind of flavor going on. Compare the first one to this one. What do you think here? Stephen, if you compare this painting to the first one, what
There are far fewer people in
there's
this
fewer
picture.
people.
And it looks like, I don't know who the person on the right is supposed to be, but I can't tell if that's an angel presenting, well, since they have the halo around them, it's also probably somebody who's holy, so I guess it's kind of like, it's Mary.
Okay,
It's not, it's Mary.
this is Mary. That's correct. This is an angel.
So it's portraying not as much of the earthly versus the heavenly, more just focusing on the heavenly.
Okay, that's right. Do the people here, do these people, the people in this picture, look a little more real than the people in the last one? Or not? This is strictly a matter of opinion. I'm just wondering what your thought is.
Yes, as a matter of detail that they put into the people.
Okay. Is, you know, Mary there someone like you'd like to take to the prom? Is that no? Okay. Not that we have a prom. You understand, so we never get into that difficulty, but not exactly, you know, a good-looking gal. Is she? Is, you know. What do you think? Do you think the painters here are just lousy artists? They don't know how to paint a good picture. You know, Avery disagrees with that proposition. What do you think's going on?
I think they're intentionally not making her ultra pretty.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why.
Okay.
Maybe to just gain a respect, not based on her beauty, but based on her position.
Okay, sure. This is the Annunciation. This is when the angel is saying to Mary, you're going to have the baby Jesus. I'm sure that's exactly what it looked like, right? In Nazareth that day when Mary was out there hanging out the wash, you know, sitting in her nice throne, and the angel. It's not real at all, is it? There's no intention here to say that this is somehow reflecting a real event in human history. It's all symbolic. Mary is symbolic, the angel is symbolic, the whole situation is symbolic. And it's saying again that these heavenly things are more important. It's Augustinian. This is Platonic philosophy. But This is a little bit later, and even now, a little bit later, you notice the beginnings of a little bit more humanity. The face of Mary looks a little bit more human than in the last picture. It's a little bit of a move toward this more greater interest in things human. This is the town hall meeting in, I don't know how you say that, Louvain, Belgium. This is called Gothic, not to be confused with people who put black paint on their faces and try to scare you at night. But what do you think here, Ben? Artistically, as you look at that town hall meeting, or town hall building, I guess it's not a meeting, where is your eye drawn? Where does your eye naturally go artistically when you look at that piece of architecture?
I'd say it goes towards the roof.
It sure does, doesn't it? Y'all notice that? The first thing you do when you look at it, I mean, it was designed intentionally to draw you artistically upwards. And so this building is possessed of what amount to essentially arrows, spires, pointing your eye up. Your eye, first of all, goes here, or here, any of these, and then it just keeps going. That's the ideal. As if this building is pointing. When somebody points at something, what do you naturally do? You look, right? I've spoiled it now, but if I were just to run an experiment and I were just standing up in front and all of a sudden I just did like that, every eye in the room would just go there, wouldn't it? Because unless you were highly disciplined and whatever. We just do that. It's a natural, instinctive response, and this building is supposed to do that to you. You look at that building and your eye is supposed to just immediately go up. You see, artistically, that's where your eye... So what's the message? What's the philosophical message, Joe, of a building that is intended, that is designed to make your eyes look upward?
Well, it's drawing you kind of to look up to heaven, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And why should we do that? Philosophically, why should we do that?
Well, I guess kind of like we were saying before, there's a perfect world of forms.
Okay, that's it. Or at least that's where the things that are important are. This is not calling your eyes down to earth. It's calling your eyes up to heaven. That's where the things are that matter. And this is the texture of medieval art. That's why, from our point of view, medieval art looks weird. We look at it and think, man, they're really ugly. What's the matter? These people didn't know how to do art. Well, they were very good artists. They knew exactly what they were doing. But they had an intention, a purpose, a philosophical agenda. And they were trying to get us to hear the message that the important things are up there in the clouds, up there in heaven, up there in the ideal world. Similar, Notre Dame. Same idea, though. You see that? It's a little later, but has the same kind of structure. It's taking your eyes upwards. Let's go inside. This is not Notre Dame, but it's a Gothic Basilica of Mary Magdalene. I wish I could give this to you, bigger. Imagine you're in there. You guys took the Europe tour last summer, and I know you were in spaces like this. These, by the way, down here are pews. See that right there? What is that? Laura, if you go into that space, philosophically, what is the message? What's the architect hoping you will feel or learn in consequence of being in that space?
Well, I think because it's a church, it's emphasizing how small we are and compared to how we got it.
Okay. You see that? You walk in here, you feel small. You're supposed to feel like an ant crawling on the carpet. Now, if you walk into a space and the effect it has on you, Nicole, is it makes you feel like an ant crawling on the carpet. then what are you supposed to gather from that? What conclusion should you reach as a result of that feeling?
That the space, the person that the space is devoted to is maybe bigger than me, or the purpose.
Sure. You see, this is like the flip side of what we see from the outside. I see from the outside everything important is upstairs, and I walk in and I discover also, by the way, I'm not important. I am not an important part of what's going on here. I don't know if you had this experience. Sometimes when you're on tours, you can. I've walked into, I've never been to this one, but similar, huge, you don't find these in America so much. St. John's Cathedral might be the closest thing we have in Spokane, but you go into, especially European cathedrals from the Middle Ages, you walk into that space and not only do you feel small, but there's a tendency to speak in a whisper. And you realize psychologically that's significant. When I walk into a bowling alley, I don't have a tendency to speak in a whisper. Now, of course, there's noise in the background, but it's like there are certain spaces where I feel perfectly comfortable speaking, at a normal volume. Not here. Even if the place is empty, I walk in there and I almost can't resist whispering, as if I might disturb somebody. You see, there's something very interesting psychologically about that kind of room. It's saying, you're not here to be heard. You're not here to be seen. In fact, we're not even sure you have a right to be here at all. But as long as you behave yourself, you can stay. Because you're in the presence of something vastly greater than you are. And you feel that. It's an emotional feeling you have. And it's intended. This is not an accident. They build these great lofty spaces to say that there's something very important going on, and it's not really about you. Some of these, in fact this may be one of them, will have all kinds of intricate artwork up here that you cannot see. You're kind of aware there's all this artwork, but why is it there? It's not for you. You can't see it. You have binoculars or something, but they didn't have those in the Middle Ages. It's to say even the art isn't for you. It's not for you. There's some other audience that's appreciating this. All right, this is a little later. This is Giotto. Giotto is considered the very beginning of the Renaissance. He's pre-Renaissance, but he's the very beginning of it. What do you begin to see here that was absent from the art that we were looking at a little bit earlier? Kaylee, what starts going on here?
You can kind of see emotions now.
You can see a little bit of emotion, can't you? This is genuine emotion. That's emotion. That's definitely... Did you see any emotion on the face of the Virgin Mary at the Annunciation? These people have feelings. Are human feelings heavenly or earthly? That's earthly. And so Giotto is the first guy, and this is part of what makes it important, the first guy who begins to just allow a little bit of the things that matter to us to sneak in. Subtly. Again, I'm not sure you take a picture of that with your digital camera, but we're closer. What is going on here? What, aside from the emotion that's present, what else says there's a little bit of interest in earth that's present in this? What's present here that wasn't in the prior stuff? Kaylee, go ahead.
I was thinking the angels are kind of looking down and they're focused down.
Okay, we still have angels, but they're kind of focused down. Very good. What else? That's good. Megan?
There's perspective.
There's perspective. Very good. You have a little bit of depth to it. Jacob?
Well, the scenery is actual scenery.
Yeah. Look at that. You got some kind of wall there and a tree. How'd that get in there? Here's a tree showing up in religious art. What's up with that? You never see that in Byzantine art. Now, we look at this and we think, oh, well, big deal, it's a tree, so what? This was revolutionary. This was, I mean, Giotto was way out on the thin ice, you know, when he starts putting landscape into it. And so all of that, this is 13th century, you know, we're 1267. He died in the early 14th century. And it's just the beginning now, just the beginning of this kind of move toward the more humanistic Renaissance. Because the Renaissance, recall, whatever else it was a rebirth of humanism, a rebirth of things and an interest in things human. Francis Schaeffer believes that, and I'm not sure I agree with him, I'm just telling you, we'll look at this later in the year, that the very beginning of the Renaissance itself can be traced back to Thomas Aquinas. Because Thomas Aquinas wants to start what? With this world. His 5 ways, he'll start with this world. It's a ladder up rather than a ladder down. And in some ways, Giotto may be, you know, he died, and remember, he died in 1274. Giotto was born in 1267. And Giotto may be now beginning to reflect artistically the influence of Francis Schaeffer, of Thomas Aquinas, philosophically. That's the way it works. Art tends to reflect what's happening in philosophy. You begin to see a little bit of interest in this world. This is another painting. This is actually Giotto. And you'll notice it similarly has a little bit of emotion going on. There's certainly emotion here. This is said to anticipate the approach of Giotto, another proto-Renaissance Italian artist. This is one of I think this is my favorite Giotto. The Kiss of Judas. Are there any angels in this picture? Nope. It's all humans. I love Judas. You're all puckered up. Look at that guy. And Jesus is going, what do you want, Papa? I mean, it's kind of hilarious, the facial expressions here. You know? That's a pucker. I mean, we're talking Judas is, I mean, you know, you don't see that in earlier painting. This is Giotto again wanting to give us humanity. There's no angels here. This is almost something you could have taken a picture of with your digital camera. Not quite, but we're getting there. And there's a much more significant interest in the humanity of this event. This is in the Hagia Sophia. Constantinople was built, back in the 5th century, is one of the most famous cathedrals in the world. In Istanbul today, of course. This mosaic, however, was made in the 12th century, so it's... What do you think of that face? That's Jesus. Jordan, what do you think of his face there? How does it strike you?
It seems pretty stoic.
Stoic, that's right. Not exactly a smiley face, is it? Does he? What mood is he in? Would you say? Or can you tell? If you walked into class and saw an expression like that on my face, would you? How would you?
Oh, I think you weren't very happy.
Okay, you think I wasn't too happy? Okay, that's fine. Kayla, what do you think? What emotion is going on there, would you say?
Maybe sadness sadness almost?
A little bit of sadness, isn't it? He doesn't look angry. It's not like he's about to throw something at you. Does he look approachable? Would you be, Spencer, what do you think? Do you think could you approach this person? Does the facial expression look like someone you could have some kind of conversation with?
Kind of.
But yeah, kind of, a little bit, but not too much, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, a little bit forbidding, but not totally.
yeah.
Not scary exactly. Yeah, see? And again, what are we seeing? We're seeing the beginning of the Renaissance. This is a human face. You know, this is not symbolic in the sense that it looks otherworldly, but it is a little bit distant. You're not just saying, oh, go give that guy a big hug, you know, but you don't have that feeling about it either. Then we get to the Renaissance. This is called Madonna and the Fish. For the life of me, I don't know what the point of the fish is. But I do know where it is. There is the fish. And there is Madonna. So it's Madonna and the fish. But who painted this? Anybody know? Do you know your art well enough to just know by looking whose work that is? Do you know? Stephen?
I'm going to guess Raphael.
That is correct. And Stephen, tell me about that art. How does that art compare to the earlier art? What's quite different about this? Why Raphael, a true Renaissance artist?
It's much more realistic because it has some depth perception. It looks more 3D as opposed to 2D.
Look at this. You got shadows here. You know, the light is all coming from the same direction. Very good. What else? Anything else? You were on a roll there. I thought maybe you had. I mean, it's realistic. The faces look real, don't they? This looks like a real guy.
Well, it's kind of strange because you have a angel, kind of, I don't know, that's kind of a weird expression, but kind of
We're here.
gazing.
Does the angel look like a human being, though?
Yeah.
It's kind of a human angel, except for the wings, of course.
Yeah. But it doesn't look like the angel is necessarily superior to
No.
Mary, who
No.
made creation.
No, the angel is worshipful, isn't she? Yeah. Right. What else? What else impresses you about this painting? Anything else? Yeah, Josiah.
I think it's also interesting how Mary, proportionately to the other people, is big.
She's big, isn't she? Yeah. In that sense, it's not quite realistic, but this was quite common. You may recall when you saw the Pietà and this, you know, in St. Peter's Basilica, Mary is considerably bigger proportionally to Jesus, who she's holding. And that was just common. It was typical. Of course, the Mariolatry at the time tended to accentuate her importance by making her bigger than life. But besides that, there's a fair amount of humanity. This is Renaissance. This is humanism. This is saying things human matter, and we're going to portray them as they are, at least in some sense, beyond what's been happening in the past. Kaylee?
It kind of looks like she's withholding Jesus from them, like she's holding him back, and he's kind of like putting his hand out there like he wants.
Maybe she's holding him back, or maybe she's just holding him up to be viewed. It's interesting. Exactly, hard to say exactly what's going on there. Good. There is the Piazza. Michelangelo did that when he was 24. Astonishing piece of work. What's really impressive about that? I mean, aside from the fact that it's just great, you know, sculpture. What's kind of impressive about it in terms of when Michelangelo is doing it? It's 1499. It's just the tail end of the 15th century. What's kind of striking about that? Okay.
It's very small, like the entire work, it wasn't very big.
Not as big as you thought, huh? Okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, you couldn't tell that from a picture like this. In terms of the actual figures, what's impressive about it? What's really almost unprecedented about it, Matthew?
Well, what I noticed is that Jesus seems kind of weak and pathetic, and
He's actually dead, you know, yeah.
a lot
so-
smaller than
All right.
Mary.
He's disproportionately smaller. But one of the things that was immediately noticed by people at the time was that this body of Jesus is very human. You know, I mean, Michelangelo, how had he educated himself as to the anatomy of and the character of, etc., the human body? How had he done that? You know the story of Michelangelo? He did multiple. Go ahead. You know. He did. He studied corpses. It was considered sacrilegious to do it, but he worked out a deal with the undertaker to sneak in at night, and he would dissect these corpses as like CSI. He's just going through and slicing and dicing and looking at the muscles, looking at the veins, looking at the nerves, looking at all this stuff. And this sculpture of Jesus very much reflects his own labors in examining human bodies, and it's a very realistic, treatment of human body. Mary, even though she's bigger, she's also very human. That's a very lovely Mary, right? She's a lovely young lady. That's a pretty young lady. Ben might want to take her to the prom. Except it's the Virgin Mary. I mean, it'd be hard to take her to the prom anyway, but aside from that. All right. Remember this one? Most people are shocked when they see it in real life, of course, because it's what, like 25 feet tall or something? What's the message of the David? What's the philosophical message of the David? I mean, it purports to be the biblical David. Is this, in fact, philosophically, the biblical David? Answer, not even close. It is, in fact, Nicole, what? Who is this alleged David? Who is it really? I don't mean like a person in history, but who does it represent? Who does it stand for?
The face of Apollo?
It could be the face of Apollo, and if that is true, then what does it represent philosophically? What's going on here? Go ahead.
He's portrayed as a god.
With sort of, yeah, a god in a certain sense. This guy, who was of course sculpted by Michelangelo during the Florentine Republic, when they'd thrown out the Medici and they were in control. You remember all that from last year? This is the very symbol of humanism. This is the man who can go conquer the world. It's supposed to be the biblical David. He's got the sling, and he's going to go out and do battle with the giant and all of that. But no, this is humanity who can go out and conquer the world. These hands are about twice as big as hands are supposed to be on a normal human. Why is that? Because it stands for the power of man. This is raw, pure, unmitigated humanism. The humanity of man is great, and there's really no place in this particular piece of art for God or trusting in God. This is David looking off with great confidence into a future that he can control. He can dominate his destiny. This is the humanist hero, you see. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying artistically, that doesn't look anything much like the characters that we bump into in the Middle Ages, does it? Where everything important is in a different world. You guys all remember that place, don't you? What's the big difference between that, the Duomo in Florence, what's the big difference architecturally between that and, say, the Notre Dame that we looked at a few minutes ago? What's quite different about this as opposed to that? Ben?
Well, it doesn't have all the spires pointing down.
What does it have?
It don't.
It has a dome. You know the difference between a spire and a dome? Spire is an arrow taking your eye upwards. A dome is what? It's a half circle. When you're looking at a circle, where does your eye tend to go artistically? A circle tends to lead your eye where? To the middle. If you look at a circle, your eye tends to go to the middle. A half circle tends to take your eye to the middle of the circle that's half there. In other words, a dome is intended to bring your eye to this world. The Duomo was a humanist piece of architecture. It's saying what's important is here. Your eye does not tend to go up here. Your eye tends to go down into kind of the center of that, broadly speaking, into this world, you see. You know, if he keeps working on it, someday he'll catch up with the Betty Sue, but you know, his first effort to try to emulate the artwork of Gore. What's noticeable about the Mona Lisa here? What do you notice about her, Avery? You like to take her to the prom?
I already did.
You did. Okay. Avery's way up front.
She is looking at whoever is looking at her.
She is, isn't she? Yeah. She's just got the tiniest little bit of a what on her face. This is like a little smile. Yeah. A little tiny smile there, you know? That's pretty much unprecedented. You never see the Virgin Mary smiling back in those Byzantine pieces of art. I like this one even better, though. You know, I always want to look at this and go, give me a break. Are you kidding me? John the Baptist out there in the Jordan, little grin on his face. Hey, bud, repent? Ah, it's okay, no problem. He's got to, no. No thunder, no fire. You know. I'm not sure John the Baptist actually looked much like that. But what I'm saying is that as we shift from this kind of earlier medieval period through the Renaissance, during the Renaissance you do have a little bit more of humanity looking like humanity. John the Baptist with a smiley face, I mean, but I think we also realize that a lot of Renaissance art was beautiful and did depict things in a beautiful way, but still slightly distorted, still idealized. Michelangelo's David is idealized. I'd like to say to you that he used me as the model, but he didn't, you know, because I wouldn't take my clothes off like that. But, you know, but there's a, why do I say this? This is just our little secret, you know what I'm saying? It was just an air of seniors, you know. But even the David is idealized. It's not quite normal humanity. It's a little bit super normal, but it sure looks more like a human being than the creatures that we were seeing back there in the medieval period. By the time you get to the post-Reformation, as I was saying yesterday, you really do have people looking like people. Whether you like Rembrandt or not, he has a particular style. I think we all appreciate, you know, shadows and light and so on. But aside from that, if you saw that picture, and then you were walking down the streets of Amsterdam, which is where Rembrandt worked in Holland there, and you happen to bump in to somebody who Rembrandt was painting, do you think you'd recognize him? Yeah, it's a real human being. This is not an idealized human being. This guy actually paid to have Rembrandt do a portrait of him. And Rembrandt did it in his typical style, but nevertheless, that guy could look at that picture and say, hey, that's me, you know, c'est moi, or however they say that in Dutch. And that's, what I'm saying is that you do go through a kind of a period in Western history where there is a little bit, at least to some degree, a balance between the Platonic and the Aristotelian, and in that magic moment of balance, including the Renaissance and the Reformation and the Post-Reformation, extends for maybe 300 years, you do have art sort of looking at this world as it is to some degree. It doesn't take long, however, before we start getting, now this is later, this is of course Monet, but this kind of painting comes in. You have what's called the Romantic era. I'm skipping over a bunch of stuff, but you get to what's called Impressionism. Okay, Impressionism. Anybody ever studied art enough to know what's characteristic or distinctive about Impressionism? What is sort of the basic stuff of Impressionistic art, Stephen?
One thing that we learned about it was that at a distance, an impressionist painting might not, no, at a distance it will look like the picture that the artist is trying to portray, but up close it's difficult to distinguish what exactly the picture is of, because
Yes.
they use
Yes.
dots.
Exactly. Exactly. That's the most important single thing about it. This is philosophy. See, Impressionism started philosophically before it became artistic. Now, I'm getting ahead of us. We haven't even dealt with the Reformation yet, but I'm going to refer back to this. So please have this thought sort of implant itself in your brain, because I promise you I'm going to refer you back to paintings like this and to Impressionistic art and say, do you remember we were talking about that, and this is the point I was making. So I'm kind of making the point in advance, but we'll come back to it. But you have philosophers, especially people like David Hume and Kant, and this is crucial. Try to understand this. Kant shifts the whole focus of philosophy so that although it had once been a focus on how we understand the external world, and we are just the observers of it, right? And the debate was over what's the nature of the external world and so on. Kant gives what he calls a Copernican revolution in philosophy. He takes the world away from the center and puts the human mind in the center. So philosophy begins to be more about the human mind and its operations than about the world which the human mind had been perceiving. The focus now is more subjective. As we move, you see, this is radical objectivity, realism, idealism. There are ideals out there, and I didn't create them. They are there in spite of me. By the time we get down to, Kant, reality becomes what's in your mind rather than what's out there in some sort of external universe of some sort. This happened because of Hume, who began to question whether or not what we think we see is really there. And Hume uses all kinds of arguments to say we cannot know for sure if what we think we see is really there. It may just be impressions. And it took about 100 years, maybe 50 to 100 years, for Impressionism to find its way into art. And so this is David Hume and Immanuel Kant. Their philosophy expressed artistically. And it's just exactly what Stephen said very well. Impressionistic art is, first of all, the appearance of a reality. I look at that and I say, oh, that's lovely. There's a bridge. water lilies, there's water, there's trees, you know. Now, it's harder when it's a projected image like this, but I think you all understand Impressionistic art well enough to know that the fundamental feature of Impressionistic art is this: the closer you get, the less you see. Right? Usually we think with art, the closer you get, the more you see. If you look at the Mona Lisa, well, you want to get a little closer to see a little better. Impressionism, you have to step away to see a little better. You get up close to that, you don't see a bridge anymore. You just see little splotches of paint. And the image disappears. You see. And that's what Kant was saying, actually, is the nature of our perception. We think we see the world around us. We think we experience stuff. But the harder you look, the less you see, until finally you wind up in a kind of skepticism where you're not really sure you're seeing anything. Not really sure anything's there. So this is what I'm saying. You see how this now starts heading toward distortion. We have distortion up here heading toward a more realistic appraisal. Now as we move away from it, we start seeing increasing distortion once again, only it's a different kind of distortion, right? It's a this worldly distortion rather than a heavenly distortion. Y'all following that? Kind of see what I'm driving at here? Does this make sense? Krista, you digging on this stuff?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah? Here's another one. Just not much different than the last one, but illustrates the point. I look at this once again, I think I'm seeing a street in the city of what? What city is presumably depicted in this artwork? The city of? What? Paris. That's right. Of course, we know it because it's Claude Monet. Well, where else could it be? You know, he's the one who's painting in Paris. Same deal, though. This is called Impressionism. Now, there were stages. There was a stage in art that was pre-Impressionism. There's post-Impressionism. This whole story can be looked at in much greater detail, but this is not a course in art. It's a course in philosophy. So I'm simply doing this for illustrative purposes. But, you know, if we kind of skip ahead, then where do we go? All right, now we're in the 20th century, you see. We're past Impressionism into a form of art that was called, this is Salvador Dali, I think you probably know that. One of his more famous, he's very distinctive in his artistic style, and this is one of his better known paintings, The Persistence of Memory. But what's the name of the kind of art that Dali is generally associated with? It's called, does anyone know? Not Impressionism, but Jake?
Surrealism.
Surrealism. By the way, congratulations, Jacob.
Oh,
Good job. Have you been exposed to that, Jacob? How did you know that? Where have you come across that in your background in academic stuff?
I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fine. But what? Just looking at that, what? If you're comparing that with Impressionism, okay? We just looked at Impressionism. Now we've skipped ahead another 50 years or so in art history, 50 to 100 years. How would you compare, just in a casual way, you don't have to be technical art critics here, but in a casual way, how would you compare what you see here with what was kind of going on with Impressionism, Sarah?
It's a clear picture, we can see what it is, but it doesn't make sense.
That's right, exactly. You know, at this point, you can get close and see more, but you're sure not sure what you're seeing, you know? Does this correspond with anything you've experienced in the real world? And if so, I don't think I want to visit your real world, but, you know, does this correspond to anything you've ever seen in the real world?
No.
Kind of, but not really, right? I mean, you see, oh, that looks like a clock. I've seen clocks, and I've seen whatever, little whatever that is, table, whatever this stuff is. But it looks almost like a nightmare of some kind, doesn't it? It looks weird, it's strange. In other words, notice that on our scale of distortion, Impressionism is less distorted. It was heading in this direction. But this is becoming much more raw subjectivism. This is the reality of your mind, not the reality of any objective order. This is the reality of the dream. This is not real. As Jacob said, it's surreal. It's over-real, literally. Or beyond real. The real sense of that, however, is that it's no longer a reality that's objectively structured in the universe around you. It's a reality that is subjectively structured by your imagination. And that has become the new reality. But I look at this and I can still see things. I can still see stuff that I recognize. It's a weird clock, but it is a clock. It's a weird tree, but it is some kind of tree, I guess. Dead. All right, let's go from that to this. This is the dominant style of art in the 20th century, isn't it? And you go downtown to, let's say, River Park, and somebody commissions some sculpting to be done. Do you see things down at River Park like the David? Is that the kind of, no, what do you see? You look at the kind of the sculpting that's done there, what is it? What do you see there? Laura, you been down there lately?
It's like a bunch of random pieces of metal put together.
Random pieces of metal put together. What's up with that? I'm not saying this to be critical. In fact, how many remember David Wang, Dr. Wang, who spoke here? He and I have talked more than once about this. Is there, in fact, he's writing a book on this very subject right now. And I think he was inspired to it last year when he was here talking with you. You inspired him, and he's working on a book. I've read the first chapter of it. And the whole hypothesis he's dealing with is there such a thing really as Christian art or Christian architecture? And is it possible for Christian architecture to be abstract? Can you have pieces of metal randomly stuck together and have that be legitimately what we call Christian art? I don't know the answer. He's working on that. That's where he's kind of working through. But anyway, Christian or not, that's not really my point right now. I just want you to look at that and say, compare that with Impressionism. What is that? Kaylee, what are you looking at there? This is by Picasso, arguably the greatest painter of the 20th century. Some would say the greatest painter of Western history. Some would say that. I mean, people who ought to know about these things. What is that saying to you, Kaylee?
It looks like a bunch of thoughts, a bunch of ideas, a bunch of dreams, like all mashed together, and there's nothing concrete or solidified.
Okay, yeah. Doesn't this look like, the title of it, by the way, The Accordionist? You're looking at a picture of a guy playing an accordion. Did you know that? I don't know about you, Matthew, I don't think I would have figured that out unless he had told me. Because what is it really? Is it an accordionist out there in the real world? It's something in here, isn't it? This is moving from a radically objective reality to a radically subjective reality. It's gone past simply Aristotle's emphasis on this world to an emphasis finally on the perceiver of this world. But where does it leave us? It leaves us in something even more distorted than we had back in the medieval period. Right? This is my favorite one is the one next. The guys always wake up for this one. Because this one is entitled Nude Descending a Staircase. Okay, now, if you don't think you're ready for this, I mean, if your maturity level is not prepared to handle, this kind of stuff, I can appreciate, cover your eyes if you want. But, get ready.
See first.
So there you are. This is considered great art, and I'm not denying it. I couldn't do that. There's intricacy to it, there's motion to it, there's a sense, there's an emotion that's going on. But the real question I want you to just think about is, what's it communicating and what is it reflecting as far as the message, if you will, of that. This is basically 20th century art. And whatever we think of it in terms of your artistic appreciation, it's more the philosophical message that's being communicated that I want you to reflect on here. Because in some ways, this history of art is echoing what we're looking at philosophically. Now, we could do the very same presentation. I could do that instead of art, we could use music. Any of you kind of up to speed on general 20th century music? What's typical of sort of what would be called 20th century good music? What's characteristic of it? Go ahead, Ben.
Well, there's a lot of distortion.
There's distortion, there's dissonance, there's sometimes just silence. John Cage does this piece where he just sits down at the piano and sits and stares at the keyboard for 4 minutes and 13 seconds, and then doesn't play a note. You see? How does that compare with Bach, who's a post-Reformation guy? You listen to Bach's music, it's got rhyme, it's got reason, it's got a kind of meter to it, it's got harmony, the dissonance resolves, it says there's meaning in life. You listen to 20th century music, and it sounds a little bit like, just taking, tinfoil and kind of rattling it for a while and then stopping. There's no beginning, there's no end, there's just noise. It is the musical expression of the same message. You see that? So be aware of the culture you're in and what's the message of your culture. Because this means something. This means that we've sort of lost our way, in my opinion, philosophically, and the artists of our culture are telling us that.